Hi everyone, today we're going to be looking at two decoupling patterns. Now, decoupling patterns are when you want to try and separate pieces of your code so they don't rely on each other. Our kind of end goal is that we have the way we've coded our game means that we can just drag in any old prefab from our assets folder that we've designed and it all just works. Nothing relies on anything else being there. As much as possible, we've minimized how many times we need to reference specific classes from other classes. Sometimes you can't avoid it, but we try and minimize it. So let's jump straight in. So I've got the same thing we were working on a few videos ago. So we've got this rocket here, and if I drag a rocket in, and then you can see the rocket up there, if I click play, what it does is it launches and its mass decreases as it runs out of fuel, and then eventually it runs out of fuel and it stops. And let's have a look at the code. It's super simple. So we've got a thrust, the mass of the rocket without any fuel, initial mass, burn time. And all it's doing is it's decreasing the mass with time, and eventually if the mass is 0, then it runs out of fuel, so that there's no thrust when it's 0. Now what I want to do here is I want to imagine a situation where we actually have a bunch of rockets. So at the moment, really, like, I can drag in as many rockets as I want, but they're kind of effectively the same. So I'm going to add a field, private string of the name. So I'm going to call it rocket name. So now, because I did the serialized field in the editor, I can name this Brian. And so I could have another rocket there and name it Steve, and they'd have a different name. We'd be able to tell the difference between them. And what I'd like is I want to imagine like a game maybe where you're controlling these rockets and you've got some kind of control board, and maybe it's a game where you're in mission control or something. And I'd like it so that you get messages where it says like, Brian has run out of fuel, Steve has run out of fuel, those kind of things. Now, what we could do is we could write like we could create like a UI manager, which a lot of people would do the first time they try and do this. And we could make it so each of our rocket engines actually references that UI manager. And that would kind of work, but what we'd end up doing is we'd make a field for that UI manager, and then in the editor maybe we'd create the UI manager here and drag it in to a reference. Or we might, maybe we'd do some kind of search when this class is created, and that would find the UI manager. And that would kind of work, but there's a way we can do things where we can try and decouple that so we don't have to think about it. And we're going to use the C# event API. And so let's just dive in and see and show you by example. It's probably the easiest way. So much like before, we had this static int of the number of rockets. That was kind of a way of decoupling as well. We could, from anywhere in our code, we could see how many rockets there currently are. We're going to create a static event. So I'm going to say public static event, and it's going to be an action. Now, so something to be aware of is the C# action class. It needs the system namespace. Now, I'm going to actually here use, instead of bringing in the system namespace, I'm going to do system.action, and I'll explain why in a minute. So this is a template class or a generic class. So we're going to, what the event's going to be is when a rocket runs out of fuel, we're going to send the name of the rocket to the control panel. And so the message will pop up that says, Steve has run out of fuel. Okay, so we're going to call this event on fuel run out. Okay, and that's our event made there. Now, the reason that I didn't like pull in the system namespace is that in Unity there are a few things that there are a few APIs in Unity that kind of cross over with some system names. So like random would be an example. So Unity has its own random namespace and its own set of random functions and methods, and system also has a random, which the problem is that when those, you end up getting some issues there if you want to use the Unity random stuff, which you almost certainly will do. Okay, so we've created our event there. Now we need to actually invoke this event and fire it when we run out of fuel. Now we want this to happen just the frame that we run out of fuel. So we're going to have to add like a last fuel. So we've got current mass. So I think we don't actually. So we just kept track of the mass. We didn't actually keep track of the fuel. So I'm going to call this private float last mass. And then what we can do is when we update the fuel, which is here, so we're going to have the update mass here. So I'm going to start by adding in a line of last mass equals current mass. And then, so current mass is I'm decreasing this by the burn rate. So mass burn rate times dt. So I'm just decreasing this. So what I need to do is, in the case where if last mass is greater than 0 and current, no, okay, it's not quite right. So if last mass is greater than mass no fuel and current mass is less than or equal to mass no fuel, then that means in this frame we went from having enough fuel, from having fuel to not having fuel. So then we can invoke this event. So let's do that. So on fuel run out. So basically what we want on fuel run out, and we want to invoke this. And the way we do it is we do where is it? I'm going to tell you what that is in a minute. So invoke basically calls this method. Now the method it fires this action. Now we're saying that this action has to take an argument of a string, and this is where we're going to put in our name, rocket name. And what this question mark does is this is a syntactic sugar. So it's basically saying we could write this out in a kind of more obtuse way, but this is just kind of a way of doing it in a few characters. This is checking to see if there's currently anything subscribed to this event. So what's going to happen is in our other classes, we're going to subscribe to this event here. Now, in the case that there's nothing subscribed to it, then this would actually be null. And then if we try and call a null method, we'll get an error. So that's what that's all about. So let's just test this before we get any further. So let's do a debug.log fuel, and actually I'm going to. Actually, do you know what? It would make more sense for us to, instead of just having the rocket name here, I'm going to do rocket name has run out of fuel, like that. Okay. So, okay, it's because I've not done this. That way, when we do our kind of our message system where we're displaying this message, we're not necessarily, we could maybe write a different, we could write like on rocket launch here, and then we wouldn't have to worry about on the other side that all our messaging system needs to do is display a string. So we're going to do this debug.log here to check it works. And then I'm going to run this, and we should, when Brian runs out of fuel, so the mass is going down, And mass no fuel is 20. So when this gets to 20, goes down to 20, there we go. Brian has run out of fuel. So we fired that once, and you can see Brian is falling to the ground, which is great. Okay, so that's our rocket engine. So we're invoking this method, we're firing it. Now we need to set up something to receive that method. And that's why we're going to add a behavior here. We're going to call this, create a C# script. We're going to call it, let's just call it message receiver, or what should we call it? Let's just call it message system, message panel behavior. What I try and avoid doing is having names of things like, I could have put UI manager, but like that could mean anything. Okay, so let's think what we need to do here. First thing, I'm going to get rid of these start and update methods, because if you don't always need them, and they add overhead if you leave them empty. First thing I'm going to do actually is I'm going to create the UI. So I'm going to UI. Let's do create a canvas first for this to appear. Let's have a look at our scene, and I can focus on the canvas, and then I can set it to 2D to have a look at the canvas there. It's usually the easiest way to do it. Am I going to change much of this? Probably not. I'm going to scale with screen size, which is what you usually do. So what that means is as we change the resolution, it kind of works. And I usually set the reference resolution to 920 by 1080. The rest is fine for now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a message. So I'm going to add a UI Text Mesh Pro. And because this is the first time I've used Text Mesh Pro, I'm going to click the Import Text Mesh Pro Essentials. And it should import some stuff for us. And then we'll have some font we can do. So you should use Text Mesh Pro because it's like way better, basically. You get much crisper text. So let's look at our game. Right, so we've got this text here. It's a bit hard to see with the background, but it is there. Let's set this to, let's make it nice and big so we can see it. I'm just going to sit at the bottom, like center it. I'm going to do auto size so it fills this up. And then I'm going to put in like what the kind of message we're going to have. So this would be like, Brian has run out of fuel. And I'm going to call this message display. And you can imagine a more complicated situation where, there's more than just the message display. So then in our behavior, we need a reference to that. So let's do serialized field, private text. I'm going to need to using TM Pro. So that's the namespace for Text Mesh Pro. TM Pro, I need the GUI one. TMP Text Mesh Pro GUI. That's the name of that's the UI text, which is different to the kind of in-game text as well. So of course, message display. And then we just need a function. So let's have a think what we're doing here. We need this behavior to take in the message from our rocket engine behavior and display it. So the way we do that is we use two of the functions that a mono behavior has, which is on enable, which happens when this is first enabled, and we've got on disable. And this is where we're going to subscribe and unsubscribe from this message. Now it's really important you unsubscribe because this is a static, event. It exists. If you were to close the scene, it still exists because static properties and things exist like in the code. They're not they don't care about Unity scenes. They're still going to exist. You need to make sure when these things are created and destroyed that we're subscribing and unsubscribing correctly. So let's do that here. So we're going to rocket engine behavior dot on fuel run out, and then if I do plus equals, and then what's quite nice here that Visual Studio does, it sees what I'm trying to do, and I can just push tab to enter that, and it creates the method for me, and it's taken in a string, which is what we want, and then I just need to unsubscribe with minus equals. Now do be careful, because I've had lots of bugs, like a few bugs, well I said lots, I've had bugs introduced where I've copied and pasted and forgot to change the plus to a minus, which is the danger of copying and pasting, so you know, that's my own fault. Okay, so what I can do here now then is I can just do message display dot text, which is the text in the display, equals obj, which is the string coming in from there. Okay, so I'm saving that. So what's this? Oh, I've got accidentally put in an extra. That's fixed. Okay, I'm going to clear that, and then I need to add the message mono behavior that I created to my canvas, and then I need my message display. So I'm going to do it there. And then to start with, I'm going to make this empty. I wouldn't normally do that, but like I'll show you something in a minute. But for now, for testing, for the rocket, I'm going to go to my prefabs and I'm going to change the burn time to 5 seconds. Otherwise, we're going to be waiting for like 10 seconds every time. So you see that's gone to 5 seconds. So I'm going to play. So the rocket is going off. Let's have a look. Still going down. Brian has run out of fuel. So it set the message. So there you go. Like, and what's good about this is like the rocket doesn't know anything about our, I'm going to call this message panel, because we might have more than one of these, and I can make a prefab of this. So I could just make that into a prefab. So I could create like a new scene. I could pull in the message panel, and maybe it's a scene or a level without any rockets. I don't need to do anything. It'll just work. The rocket, I can put that in a scene without the message panel. Still works. They don't care. They're decoupled. They don't care about each other, but we've got this behavior that almost feels like they're coupled, but they're not. So that's hopefully you can see the power of that, is that we can make this then collection of different prefabs. I could have a different type of rocket that sends a different message, or a different vehicle that sends different messages, and the message panel, it's just sat there. All it's responsible for is displaying messages, and it just sits there waiting happily. It subscribes to the things it wants to subscribe to, and then does it. Okay, so let's make things like, I mean, you know, there's a couple of problems with what we've done. That message just stays there forever. So let's say we don't want to do that, really, do we? We want what I want to happen is I want this thing to start out. Let's put some text in it. I'll show you what I want to happen. Message. Right. I want this to start out at a scale of like 0. Then when the message appears, I want it to like immediately be 1. And then this is just, don't worry about that. That won't happen when we do it. And then I want it to slowly shrink away. So let's start that. Well, actually, no, we'll start that at 1. So that when what you usually find is when you're working on a UI, you have all these UI things just max at their normal size and it looks a mess. But then when the game starts, it shrinks all those things down, and then it shows them as it needs them. So let's go back to our code. And then now what we want is we want a start method for when well, actually, I'm going to put it in awake, which happens before start. So awake. I'm going to get our message display dot it's going to be rect transform because it's a UI element. So rect transform equals, and then rect transform is a rect transform dot scale, local scale equals, and local scale is going to be a vector 3, new vector 3, 0f, 0f, 0f. Let's just check that works. So when I start it, it should disappear. Yep, it does. It's great. And then what I want to do is, I need to do it so that when this message comes in, the scale needs to come up. So I'm going to do message display dex like that, and then I'm going to do equals 1, 1, 1. So now, and if you notice, I do, like, as much as possible, when you make a little change, test it, see if it works, because that will just help you out. Like, bugs are complicated. Okay, so that it's worked, it pops up. And now what we want this to kind of slowly shrink away. And then, so to do that, I'm going to have a field here, private float, and call it shrink. Let's call it tween time. Okay. And then what I'm going to use is I'm actually using a package from the asset store, which is super, super good, and you should absolutely learn how to use it. I'm actually going to set this tween time to like 5 seconds. So we've got this do tween. It's a really, really good tweening package, and I've installed it. And like with many things, I find myself continually going to the documentation to remember how to do things. But what's really nice is that it has this way of doing this kind of. So if I search for like rect transform is what we're going to tween, and what we want to do is we want to change the scale, which isn't on here, but we'll see, because it's a transform, it might already be there. But this is really good anyway. You should have a look at the documentation. It's really, really easy to figure out. But the first thing we need to do is we need to import the namespace using dg.tweening. Then what we can do is if I go to message display.rectTransform.do, then we've got a list of all of the things we can tween. So can we do scale? Yeah, we can do scale. So I'm going to do scale, and then I've got the end value and the duration. So the end value, I want it to be 0, and the duration, I want to be the tween time. And what that does, that will tween the scale to 0 from, we've set it to 1, and it will take tween time seconds. So I've set that to 5 seconds. I'm going to set it to like 2 seconds to show this. But obviously you'd have it a bit longer than that. So up he goes, he runs out of fuel, and then it appears and it shrinks. Now, in a real game, in a real UI, you'd probably want that to be a little bit nicer. You'd want it to kind of maybe grow and then shrink, but I didn't want to get too complicated here. I want to show you the basics. So this is all great. Okay, it's decoupled, there's a little bit of animation. Now, what happens if we have 2 rockets? So I'm going to bring in another rocket, and this rocket is going to be called Dave. No, we said Steve, didn't we? And this rocket's going to have a burn time of 5.1 seconds. So it's going to run out of fuel just afterwards. So let's have a look what happens here. I wonder if we can put these somewhere nearer to the. Oh, we don't need to see them. I can just look at them in the editor. Oh, like Steve is right there. Great. So we're going to keep an eye on Steve. Look at his mass. And what's going to happen here? Okay. So Steve's run out of fuel. So Did we see the Brian? Like, okay, let's call this 6 seconds so we can see it happen a bit better. But you can already see that there's a problem. Brian's run out of fuel, Steve's run out of fuel. But Steve, like, the message from Steve was really tiny and it kind of appeared halfway through the other message. So what's happening here is we have a problem. We have a coupling problem because the rocket engine behavior, it will just send these messages out as soon as they're ready, right? I've run out of fuel, I'm going to send this message. But our message panel, it doesn't, it'll get this message and process it straight away. But our last message is still displaying. So that's a problem. What we want to happen is when we get, if we're displaying a message and we're doing the message animation, if a new message comes in, we want to wait for our previous message to finish. And that's where we start thinking about something called an event queue. And an event queue is a way of decoupling things in time. So an event queue, we're going to make it so that this message panel, that when it receives instructions, it is decoupled from when it processes them. And like I said, we do that with a queue. So let's just do it. And we're going to use something called just a queue. So we're going to do a private queue of string because it's going to be a queue of messages, and we're going to call it messages equals new queue string. And what this is a first in, first out queue in C#. And then what we're going to do, instead of actually, what I'm going to do, I'm going to extract this method, because this method actually is display and start display message, right? Display message and animate. Then we know what it's doing, because it can be sometimes like if you see just this line here, you might not realize that there's a whole animation going to be fired off. So we're making this so it's descriptive. So if someone else is coming to our code, they know it's going to animate it as well. So we don't want to do that here. What we want to do is we want to add this message to the queue. So we do messages dot enqueue, and it takes in a string obj. Okay. So what will happen here is when this is fired, it will get added to this message queue. But at the moment, we haven't got anything actually displaying the message. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an update. And it's probably like, so this is going to be overkill, right? Because we don't really need to check this every frame, but we're going to just for ease update, I'm going to show you this. So here we want to check. In fact, I'm going to create let's stick to the single responsibility principle and make a method for this. So void check queue. So what we want check queue to do is we want to check two things. Firstly, we need to check if there is currently a message being displayed. So the way we can do that is actually there's a really nice function in the DOT Tween API has this nice function called isTweening, and we can check to see if an object is tweening. So if the message display .rect transform is tweening, then we know that our message still hasn't finished. So if it's not tweening, then it's ready for a new message. So if it's not tweening, we check to see are there any actual messages in the queues. So if messages dot count greater than 0, then we know that there are messages waiting. Then what we can do is we can do display messages and animate messages dot dequeue. And what dequeue does is it grabs the next string that's in the queue, it takes it out, it returns it, and then removes it from the queue. So we don't have to do anything else. That's done. And then that will be sent to this display message and animate. It will display the message, animate it, and we're all good. So let's go check queue. And we're going to do that. So yeah, we will I wonder if we can, I'm going to do a debug here just to make a point of, so current queue length. And I'm going to do messages dot count dot toString, so that every time something gets added to the queue, we can see how much is in there. So let's click save and let's run this, shall we? Okay. So we're going to be looking at the console, waiting this. Okay. There you go. Okay, so absolutely worked. So in both cases, the queue length was 1. And if you look, we had Brian's run out of fuel, Steve has run out of fuel. Let's go a bit. Let's change this a little bit more. So let's go rocket 2, rocket 3, rocket 4. 2 is going to have a burn time of 4.5 and is going to be Bob. This one's going to have 5.25. Matthew, Matt. And then this one's going to be 5.87. It's going to be called Sir Rocket. Right, so then we've got a bunch going at all different times here now. It should still work, right? We should be okay with this. So this is like a really good pattern to learn. So see, look at this. Our queue's filling up, but still, this is all, these messages are coming out one at a time. And it's in the order they were added to the queue. And it's a really, really powerful pattern. Like a really, really powerful pattern that you can use for all sorts of things. You can use it for like displaying achievements. You can imagine a case where someone unlocks a bunch of achievements and they appear in order. I use it a lot for tutorials, actually. So like you might have like a bunch of triggers that set off tutorials. Like both these systems actually work really well for tutorials, is having this kind of event system where you're saying like on, I don't know, you can have events being fired off by this event system that coincide to tutorial messages, which is super good and super easy and like, well, it's not easy. It's once you know it, it's easy. But it's a really, really powerful tool and powerful set of skills to have in your arsenal. So yeah, thanks for watching. Let me know what other videos you'd like to see. What other ways do you use to decouple things? Have you tried anything out? Let me know in the comments. Let me know by email. Just, you know, chat to me. Hope everything's going well. Thanks for watching.